How is Elon so productive? Have you ever deconstructed this?
So actually, I've known Elon for a long time. I didn't work with him for a very long time, just because were working on different things. But I've been working with him quite closely for the last couple of years, starting with the X acquisition.
Billionaire Mark Andreessen reveals stunning insight and behind-the-scene perspective into the mind of Elon Musk.
And then we've also invested in XAI and in SpaceX. And so we now work on three companies together to different degrees. And now the government stuff. Yeah, I mean, there's basically, he has an operating method that he's developed that I would say is very unusual by modern standards. I'm not aware of another current CEO who operates the way that he does. And I think probably the single biggest kind of question in all of business right now is why don't more CEOs operate the way that he does? And it's a complicated question we could talk about. If you go back in history, you find characters more like him, especially like the industrialists of the late 1800s, early 1900s, people like Henry Ford or Andrew Carnegie or Thomas Watson, who built IBM. If you go back and read the biographies of people like that, Andrew Mellon, those guys, Cornelius Vanderbilt, those guys ran very similar to the way that Elon runs things. And it's just this incredible devotion from the leader of the company to fully, deeply understand what the company does and to be completely knowledgeable about every aspect of it and to be in the trenches and talking directly to the people who do the work, deeply understanding the issues and being the lead problem solver in the organization. And basically what Elon does is he shows up every week at each of his companies. He identifies the biggest problem that the company's having that week and he fixes it. And then he does that every week for 52 weeks in a row. And then each of his companies has solved the 52 biggest problems that year. And, most other large companies are still having the planning meeting for the pre-planning meeting, for the board meeting, for the presentation, for the compliance review and the legal review. And he's just like, it's this level of both like incredible intellectual capability coupled with incredible force of personality, moral authority, execution capability, focus on fundamentals that is just like really amazing to watch. And then, by the way, the side effect of it is he attracts many of the best people in the world to work with him. Because if you work with Elon, the expectations are through the roof in terms of your level of performance. And he is going to know who you are and he is going to know what you've done. And he's going to know what you've done this week. And he's going to know if you're underperforming. And he may fire you in the meeting if you're not carrying your weight. But if you are as committed to the company as he is and working hard and capable, many people who have worked for him say that they had the best experience of their lives when they were working for him. And so then there's this attraction thing. And that's why I think his companies compound the way they do is because they just keep bringing.
Why don't more CEOs take this hands-on approach? It's almost like they're afraid to get into the trenches. Elon's method proves that when leaders fully commit, they inspire excellence and drive results that are impossible to achieve through traditional corporate bureaucracy.
And people look at this from the outside and they're like, how can people tolerate, all the criticisms, how can they tolerate this guy? And inside the company, people are like, finally, I get to work
Someone
for
gets
somebody
it. Yeah.
Somebody gets it. Somebody used to work in one of the other defense aerospace companies and went to work at SpaceX and said, he was asked what it was like. And he said, it's like being dropped into a shocking zone of competence. Right. It's just like everybody around me is absolutely competent. And most of us never have that experience. Most people are never in an organization where the bar is held that high. And as a consequence, the competence level is so high and stays so high and even rises over time. And again, to his massive credit, he has been able to do that repeatedly.
The contrast is striking. Where most workplaces settle for mediocrity, this environment thrives on excellence. By consistently raising the bar, Elon has built a culture that not only sustains high competence, but also amplifies it over time.
So detail-oriented, focusing on everything from A to Z in terms of the business, sort of intimately familiar with it, and prepared to get his hands dirty from I will get in there and actually look at solving the problem myself. So is that, that suggests to me, although this can't be the case because you couldn't run this many companies if you were doing it this way, there may be some challenges in learning when to delegate, when to hand off tasks, because in order to get that level of resolution, to be able to see things with that much finitude, you also need to spend a lot of time on it. And then if you're solving the problems, how do you choose the problems that are yours to solve and the problems that aren't, so on and so forth. So that must be a challenge, delineating between what is my problem to solve and what is somebody else's.
Yeah, so I would say most leaders, like most CEOs we work with, have exactly that problem for exactly the reasons you described. I think the Elon method is a little bit different, and I don't know if he'd agree with this, but the way I think about it is he actually delegates almost everything. Like he's not involved in most of the things that his companies are doing. He's involved in the thing that is the biggest problem right now until that thing is fixed. And then he doesn't have to be involved in it anymore. And then he can go focus on the next thing that's the biggest problem for that company right now. In any manufacturing chain, there's always some bottleneck. There's always something that is keeping the manufacturing line from running the way that it's supposed to. Sometimes the bottleneck is at the beginning of the process. We can't get enough raw material. Sometimes the bottleneck is at the end of the process. We don't have enough warehouses for the finished product, or the bottleneck might be somewhere in the middle. There's always a bottleneck. Whatever the bottleneck is holding everything up. The job number one is to remove that bottleneck and get everything flowing again. And he basically has universalized that concept, and he basically looks at every company like it's some sort of conceptual assembly line, sometimes a literal assembly line, making cars and rockets. And basically, any given week, there's a bottleneck. There's guaranteed to be the main bottleneck. There's going to be one thing that's going to be the thing that's holding people back. And so the answer to your question, the resolution of the paradox is, I'm going to micromanage the solution of that. I don't need to manage everything else, because everything else by definition is running better than that, right? And so I can go focus on that. The other part of it that is so compelling, and this is where I think a lot of especially non-technical CEOs would really struggle to implement the method, is he really, when he identifies the bottleneck, he goes and he talks to the line engineers who understand the technical nature of the bottleneck. And if it's people on a manufacturing line, he's talking to people directly on the line. Or if that's people in a software development group, he's talking to the people actually writing the code. Right. So he's not asking the VP of engineering to ask the director of engineering to ask the manager to ask the individual contributor to write a report for, that's to be reviewed in 3 weeks. He doesn't do that. He would like throw them all out of the window. There's just no way he would do that. What he does is he goes and personally finds the engineer who actually has the knowledge about the thing. And then he sits in the room with that engineer and fixes the problem with them. Right. And again, this is why he inspires such incredible loyalty from especially the technical people who he works with, which is they're just like, wow, if I'm up against a problem I don't know how to solve, freaking Elon Musk.
Elon's approach is a masterclass in leadership. He doesn't just delegate blindly or sit in endless meetings. He zeroes in on the single biggest bottleneck, no matter where it is. Then, instead of relying on layers of management to filter the problem, he goes directly to the source, talking to the engineers and frontline workers who actually understand the issue. This not only speeds up the problem-solving process, but also shows his team that their work and expertise are valued. Imagine working for a leader who is willing to roll up his sleeves and solve the problem right alongside you. That's the kind of leadership that inspires loyalty and drives innovation.
Call on the guy that owns the company.
Freaking Elon Musk is going to show up in his Gulfstream, and he's going to sit with me overnight in front of the keyboard or in front of the manufacturing line, and he's going to help me figure this out.
Wow.
Right. And so it's like, okay, you're like a normal CEO running a normal company. Like, how can you possibly compete with that?
What are the other reasons that CEOs of similar companies or comparable companies don't do that? Technical understanding, I get that you need to be able to get your hands dirty from a specificity perspective, but what else?
Yeah, so so that's a lot, and that's a topic that makes people really mad, because non-technical people really hate being told that they are not qualified to do something. But every now and then, the technical details actually do matter. So there's a whole domain there. And most managers, it's like most people in government are lawyers. Most people in business and in senior levels are MBAs. Most large companies are not run by engineers, right? They're run by trained business people. And so or increasingly also lawyers. And so there is a real challenge there. And then I just think more generally, it's just the way that management is taught, and most classically in the form of something like our Harvard Business School or Stanford Business School, it's basically management as it was sort of developed and implemented in like the 1950s, 60s, 70s. It was sort of the so-called scientific school of management. And so it's basically management as a generic skill that you can apply to any industry. And, you could manage a soup company, or you can manage, I don't know, whatever kind of company. And they're kind of all the same, and it kind of doesn't matter what they do. And there's a common set of management practices, and it has a lot to do, it's process. How do you structure? How do you manage the balance sheet? How do you set the review schedule for the meetings? How do you do compliance? How do you, hire, how do you manage how do you hire and motivate executives? How do you resolve interpersonal conflicts? Like all these like general business skills. And by the way, those general business skills are, very useful in lots of contexts. It's just that training doesn't give you any of the that training gives you none of what you need to go do what Elon does. And then Elon I would say he pushes it as far as he can, and not doing all the stuff that you're classically trained to do, so that he can spend all of his time doing the things that only he can do, which it turns out has this incredible, catalytic multiplicative effect where his companies are, so just incredibly amazing. Elon just said this thing at the most recent Tesla event that blew my mind, because his companies are famous. They don't actually have like marketing departments. Tesla doesn't spend any money on sales and marketing. They don't sell the cars. Like every other car company in the world is like running all these ad campaigns all the time, TV commercials and the newspaper flyers and the quarterly sales events and like all this crazy stuff and promotions. Tesla doesn't do any of that. It's the best car, and you just show up and buy it or not. It's up to you. You're a moron if you don't, right? Like it's a very straightforward thing.
My dad.
This really challenges the traditional view of what makes an effective leader. Non-technical CEOs often get defensive about the idea that their lack of expertise could limit their effectiveness, and understandably so. But in industries like tech, where the details truly matter, leaders like Musk prove that being deeply technical can amplify their impact exponentially. It's not just about knowing the details, it's about solving problems no one else can. How many CEOs today are missing out on this multiplier effect by staying at arm's length from the work that actually drives their companies forward?
I went to go and test drive a Model S maybe a couple of years ago, and he's sort of an old school car guy, and he's used to the sort of banter back and forth, the forecourt, the discussion. So please sit down. Would you like a coffee? Would you like, what is that? And he said that he walked in and it felt like he got into an Apple store, and there was some, as he called it, teenager in a hoodie that came out, and my dad started to do the whole like classic boomer parent negotiation thing, and this guy was like, the price is the price, I don't have any fucking coffee for you. So he left feeling like this is the new world, and now he has a Range Rover. So yeah.
Well, that's the thing. It's like, do you want the best car in the world or not? Right? Like that's Elon's mentality, right? And it's working very well. And then he, at this event, he took it to the next level, and this broke my brain. He said, if you think about it, he said the best product in the world shouldn't even need a logo. Like you shouldn't even have to have your name on the product.
People can just identify it.
Everybody knows because it's the best product in the world. Everybody has it. Everybody uses it. And like, of course, you don't need to put the name on it. Everybody knows, right? And so and for a minute, I was like, all right, is this like a Zen, thing that I think about? and then I was like, no, he's actually, as usual with Elon, it's like, no, he's actually serious. The best product in the world would not need your name on it.
Yeah.
And so, anyway, so it's just this completely different method. And then on top of that, to have the guy who's on top of his game, to kind of be working on the government challenge, and then to have the new president fully signed up, embracing Elon and encouraging him to do this is a really, I mean, this has not, you have to go back, like literally the last time something like this happened in the United States government was literally like 1933. This is the closest analogy to what has started to happen is literally what happened under FDR, which is just like a fundamental reinvention of how government works, and like this massive influx of talent from the private sector that is able to just like do things that are unimagined.
Tesla's approach to selling cars shatters traditional notions of customer experience. Gone are the days of negotiating over coffee and small talk on the dealership floor. Instead, Tesla treats their vehicles like an iPhone. You're here for the product, not the pageantry. And when Musk says the best product in the world doesn't need a logo, he's making a point about how transformative products stand on their own merit. It's a statement of intent. Tesla isn't competing on gimmicks or discounts. They're aiming to deliver a product so extraordinary that its quality becomes its identity. It's a hard pill to swallow for those used to the old way of doing things, but it speaks to a broader shift in how technology companies like Tesla are reshaping consumer expectations across industries.